Welcome to China Tech Talk, a weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I am John Artman, editor-in-chief of technode.com, as always joined by Matthew Brennan, founder of China Channel. And so this week we have on Elliot Zaagman. So as we discuss a little bit, I've known Elliot for quite a long time. He and I met in 2008, I believe. We ended up working together, teaching English. And it's always kind of interesting because whenever I meet new people, they say, well, how long have you been here? Oh, about 10 years. Well, what are you doing? And how did you, what's your story? And it ends up taking about 10 minutes, I would say, to tell the entire story. I'm doing my best to condense it for time's sake. But Elliot, I mean, his story is just as long as mine. And I think that's really interesting because he and I are kind of textbook case examples of kind of the young expat story where you come and you teach English just to get your foot in the door. And then, 10 years later, you've made a career out of doing something, at least in my case, something very, very different. In Elliot's case, I would still say there's still a lot of training and education involved.
Yeah, so Elliot works with a lot of different Chinese companies to do HR-related training, focusing on them internationalizing, which is a big growth area right now. So I'm sure he's quite busy, and he's written a lot of interesting articles for TechNode and for some other people as well in this space. So it made a bit of a name for himself with some insightful content. And today, there was one article I just picked up on it, and I was like, I've been wanting to cover this area for a while, and this seems like a great opportunity to get someone on who's done quite a bit of research in this area. I think he spoke to a lot of people before he actually wrote down this article. And so we're using that as the base, as the jumping off point for this episode. That's in the show notes. So again, if you want to, I would suggest anyone listening to also read Elliot's article and check it out, maybe before or after this podcast, and it will supplement everything that we're covering.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I mean, like Elliot has a lot of expertise in this area. I remember actually I was working at a company before TechNode, and we were scaling up very, very quickly. Just to give some context, right after, like, when I left, we had gone from about 0 to 50 people in about a year and a half, and at some point I was feeling like under a lot of pressure. And so I reached out to Elliot because I knew that he did these, the corporate training and things like that. And so we ended up having dinner together and kind of talking through some of the issues. And it was amazingly helpful. He knows his stuff when it comes to how to think about how to structure an organization, how to think about common problems inside of an organization. And really, I mean, I think coming from almost like a classical kind of classical Western management science perspective, in if that kind of makes sense. But looking at an organization and, thinking, diagnosing its problems, and also helping to understand, what makes it tick. And that's exactly what we did with this episode. I mean, we ended up talking mostly about Huawei, not so much about Lenovo. And I think that one of the reasons that happened was because people don't know very much about Huawei, whereas Lenovo's their entire corporate structure is just more transparent, and they seem to be a bit more following a Western model, whereas, kind of as it comes out in our discussion later, Huawei is very much following a Chinese model where there's not very much transparency. There's a lot going on, and it can be very difficult to work with or work for if you don't have a particular mindset. And with that, we give you Elliot Zaagman. Well, Elliot, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So you and I have actually known each other for quite some time. But for our listeners, could you just tell us what is your China story? How did you end up coming to China, and what are you doing now?
Okay, well, my China story, actually, yeah, John and I go way back to the audience here. I came to China for the first time in 2008, a week before the Olympics. So I came with a teaching program that would kind of set you up with an apartment and set you up with a job and a stipend and a flight and stuff. If you taught for them for a year, and there was like a group of foreign teachers from the U.S. or the U.K. or Australia, and John, you were one of them. And the first day that I ever came to China, I met all these other teachers, and I didn't know a word of Chinese. I need to get a bottle of water, so I went up to this guy and I said, "How do you say water?" Right? And he goes, "Shui," and I said, "Shui," and he goes, "Shui," with a finger, like to imply the tone. And yeah, so I've never forgotten how to say water. But that's when I met John Arden here. And yeah, I've been back and forth a little bit. But yeah, I've had kind of a pretty long kind of journey. When I first came to China 10 years ago, I didn't have any plan to be here for a long time. But I kind of fell in love with the place. I was a sociology major for my bachelor's degree, and China, if you're interested in social science, like China is just it's a gold mine. It's just so fascinating. The stories of everybody, just how much change is going on, how that affects how people interact with each other, how people work, and how people see the world. And I just fell in love with the place. I'm just just was super fascinated by it. I can't say that I've always enjoyed being here, but I've always been fascinated by it. I always love it. I don't always like China, but I always love China. So what I've done here is I've mostly worked in some form of either corporate training or PR or media in one way or another for my time here. So I've done a lot of different corporate training programs for large Chinese firms, for large Chinese state-owned firms. I worked a lot for the National Development and Reform Commission in the past. And I've also, in the last 3 years, I with a colleague of mine, we started our own company and have done a lot of training and consulting for different multinationals in China and Chinese firms as they go global. And one thing that has happened more recently is in 2016, I started working for Lenovo, which was a kind of an infamous company here in China that just expanded in every which way, had these huge global ambitions, wanted to be basically the next combination of Google, Apple, and Tesla. And they expanded, and then they completely fell apart. And that was actually probably, the company completely failed, but it was probably the best decision I ever made career-wise in China, because they had brought on so many of these talented, experienced people from Lenovo, from Huawei, from Baidu, from Alibaba, to help them with their expansion. And then as the expansion kind of fell apart, everybody went off to different companies. And so now I have friends and contacts at just about every major Chinese tech firm. And I've been able to do a lot of different work, either doing PR or doing marketing or doing a lot of coaching and training for Chinese companies that have been globalizing. But what most people have known me for over the last year is that I do a lot of writing about China and Chinese companies as they globalize. So I write some for TechNode. I also write for the dreaded competitor Tech in Asia.
They're not so dreaded. Come on.
Not so dreaded. And then I then in Chinese I write for a website called Huxiu so huxiu.com, and that's how most people know me in China. So I kind of operate like a media company, and that most people know me because I'm a columnist or I'm a journalist, but I don't really. That's not really how I make a living. I make a living from doing things like PR and marketing, as well as coaching and training for mostly Chinese firms.
Got it. Yeah, Huxiu Wang's actually quite good. They're a very, very good source. Do they have any English language stuff out? I don't think so, right?
No. I'm the only kind of foreigner that's associated with them. Basically how I work with them is I write all my stuff in English. But they have a translator for me who has been working with me for about a year, and he's just great. And he's become a really good friend of mine. He understands kind of how I think, and he just does a really, really good job of translating for me. Their CEO has been very supportive of me as well. So I've always kind of worked with them and been able to trust them when it comes to my work.
Awesome. Well, today the reason we got you on the podcast is because one of your articles. So exactly what you said, right? People know you from that stuff. And the one we want to focus on today, I think, is a really, really interesting topic, which was you were basically in the article contrasting two different companies, which is Huawei and Lenovo. But what we're really talking about is sort of Chinese tech industry, internet industry companies, the internal company culture. So first, like, what inspired you to write this article?
That's a very good question. So when I worked for, first of all, I had worked with both companies before, doing some kind of training or doing some kind of projects with them. So I had become familiar with both companies, and I had developed a kind of a training curriculum that was focused on basically cross-cultural skills, cross-cultural leadership skills for Chinese professionals. And the person who supported me and was one of the first executives to really get behind it was Gina Chow, who was then the head of HR for Lenovo. So they were one of my first big clients. So I had been able to, I was really surprised by how open they were, how really they operated very similar to like a traditional multinational. And then I had also done some work before with Huawei. So I had some experience with them too. But then when I was at Leeco, I got hired by somebody who had worked with me before at Lenovo. And I was in the HR department at Leeco and had noticed there were a lot of the people who were director level positions or GM level positions had previously been with either Lenovo or Huawei. And I found just the way that their assumptions were about what appropriate behavior was, how to do business, how to communicate was very, very different. And to be honest, I found myself kind of naturally clicking with the Lenovo folks a lot, and less so with the Huawei. Not that I didn't get along with the Huawei people, but I felt like it was much harder to connect with them. It was much harder to build trust with them. And I kind of, when I left the company, I kind of was wondering, how you have these two companies that are China's two biggest international brands, but clearly seem to have very different world views, like fundamentally different ways of seeing business and seeing the world. And I wanted to kind of figure out what that was and why that was. So what I started doing is just saying, I started researching both companies, and just like seeing what was written about them online. But then I just sent out something on my WeChat that said, okay, to everybody, if you know somebody who has worked at Lenovo or Huawei or both, I would like to talk to them. Send me a message. And I talked to almost 30 people altogether, who 5 people who had worked at both Lenovo and Huawei, and then ultimately almost 30 from quite low level to senior executive level at both Lenovo and Huawei, and just getting a feel for their experience working for the company, their basically how they would describe the company, what the priorities of the company was, why they, if they liked or didn't like working for the company, where that came from, and I got. I'd say I didn't realize when I started just kind of what I would end up uncovering, but it's really at the core of it is really, it's bigger than just Lenovo and Huawei. It is a discussion about how Chinese companies relate to the world, and how they see themselves in the world, and whether or not really they work within the existing system, or they kind of create a system themselves, whether they become a multinational, or whether they are kind of a Chinese company that does business a Chinese way abroad. And I think for most Chinese companies that are globalizing, that is really the core discussion of how they are going to operate. So yeah, I think that the issue is much bigger than just Lenovo and Huawei. It is really how Chinese companies will choose to identify themselves as they go global.
Yeah, and I have to resonate with you, especially when you're talking a little bit about connecting with the people. I don't have much experience with Lenovo. Before I joined TechNode, I was at a localization company, and my main job was to service Chinese clients, and so one of our biggest ones was Huawei. So we ended up working quite closely with them. And then with Lenovo, at least, just ended up having a few meetings and nothing really took off. But Huawei, their internal culture is like, I think, the most hardcore I've ever seen of any internal culture, actually. And now it ends up that I have a few friends that that have ended up working there, and they've done a pretty good job of kind of proving their ability, and then but also proving that their work ethic. And so in some ways they've been able to kind of cushion themselves from some of that. But they're foreigners. The Chinese staff certainly can't really do that. And even then, I mean, a lot of people are there because they want to be there, because they have a sense of there's a sense of pride working for Huawei and being able to survive in that type of culture. I think one of the things that they do is, after your probation is up, I believe it's usually 6 months for a Chinese employee. Once your probation is up, you actually have to go in front of a committee and provide a defense for why you should be able to keep working at Huawei. And then, even after that, I mean, KPIs are your god. You have to meet your KPIs, and it's kind of a meritocracy in that sense, because the people who can meet their KPIs and go above and beyond, the people who commit 60, 70, 80 hours per week, they are the ones that are getting promoted. But then if you don't, it's actually very difficult to get ahead in that organization.
Yeah. The term that I heard from a couple people when they talk about Huawei was "kill or be killed," and that seems to be their philosophy for success. I mean, there is there was somebody who worked for a long time at Lenovo and they worked at Huawei, and they were basically like, nobody trusts anybody at Huawei unless they absolutely prove that you're worthy of trust, and then they're still suspicious. At Lenovo, they will trust you until you prove that you are not worthy of trust anymore. So it's a very different set of assumptions, and I think a lot of it does come from how these companies came to really be what they are. So Lenovo, they grew through acquisition, right? They're big. The way that they became, this big, superpower, this big MNC that we know today, is that they acquired IBM's PC business. So what they had to do is really they had to say, okay, well, we have the companies that we are acquiring. They know more about how to do these things than we do, right? So we need to find a way to be, the bosses, but also to let them do what they're going to do. So they're very decentralized. When you speak with Lenovo people, they will say that they don't really have a one headquarters. That they have headquarters all over the world. They do not really rely on sending people on expat assignment very much. They will allow their local offices to basically manage themselves, which has its own advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages is that, go to the US and say Lenovo is a Chinese company to people, and they're like, what? Lenovo is a Chinese company? I didn't know that. And that, I think, does really speak to Lenovo's strength, is that they have been able to let go of the reins a little bit and to be able to trust some of these overseas offices to do things their way and to be flexible. Huawei is really the opposite when it comes to that. They are from the center out. They are they bring in people who tend to be, what they look for is hungry people. So people who are usually from small cities, who don't have a lot of family wealth, who are smart and from good universities, who want to achieve, right? So ideally, somebody who is from a poor background but went to a top university, that's what they want. They bring them in and they say, okay, if you work your ass off, you have a chance to really make a name for yourself and really succeed and bring your family into this, global middle class or upper middle class. So they give them that opportunity. To make, kind of in Chinese we say di tongjin, like your first pot of gold. So they bring them in there, and their background is very military, right? So Ren Zhengfei, who's their chairman and their founder, he is a former PLA officer, and the way that they bring people in is very much like a military boot camp.
Sorry, Elliot. To be clear, I mean, he was in the engineering corps, right?
I believe so, yeah. So, but the culture that they come from and the way that that they seem to understand like how to organize an organization is very similar to the military, right? So I think that so first of all, I do think that there is a lot of that Ren Zhengfei's association with the PLA in the past does cause them to be under suspicion when it comes to national security issues with like Australia and the U.S. I can't really speak to that. I don't really know. I as much through researching the company, I don't really know if there's how much evidence there is behind that. I have yet to hear a really good argument to say that they actually are, spying for the PLA or anything like that. So I think that should also be clear. But what they do is they will bring people in, and they basically will from the very beginning they kind of indoctrinate them. They kind of xinao, they brainwash. That is the term that they will use. The people into the culture, and the people who join from this young age, who get through the boot camp, they make them sign away their rights for annual leave, as like a show of devotion, as a show of commitment, right? And they call these people like the strivers, right? And these people who are kind of like there from the beginning, and they really implement this idea of like 奋斗, like struggle, right? To like it's Marxist in a lot of ways, like to be constantly struggling. So, and each day it is a struggle. You are fighting. You're fighting with somebody, whether it's somebody else internally or whether it's somebody externally. You are constantly fighting. So they bring these people from this young age to kind of this kind of core group, and they will often send these people on assignment overseas, right? Because these are the people who have like Huawei in their blood, and they will go overseas, and and they will usually they're like you said, KPIs are really their god. They they have to hit them, and if they don't, they're screwed. If they do, they are very handsomely rewarded. So what you have at Huawei is these people who go overseas. They have these goals that they have to hit, and they do anything that they can to hit them. Like basically, for a lot of them, I mean, some might contest to this, but all methods are on the table because the only thing that matters is hitting that goal. Although Huawei themselves may disagree with that, but this is the idea that I get from. This is what people have said to me. But then what ends up happening is you get really this kind of secretive culture that's internal, that are these people who kind of came from the beginning. So you have these. It's in China. You'll have this idea of being like teacher nay, teacher y, like being within the system or without the system, the system, right? And a lot of this refers to like the Communist Party in China, that you have the kind of people that are within the system, within the party, and then you have the people that are out of the party. And in Huawei, you get that same kind of thing. You have the people that started from the beginning, that understand Huawei, they have Huawei in their blood, and then you have the people that will come in and out, right? And then those people can be, they're not as easily relied upon. And so you'll see if you want to know, I mean, to understand, look at their senior executives. Every single one of their senior executives has been with Huawei for at least 20 years. 1997 was the most recent any of their senior executives have joined the company. So the way that they construct their culture is this very, very, very like strong sense of internal loyalty. So if you go abroad on assignment, what you're going to end up doing if you have to hit these KPIs is you're going to bring people from other projects that you've worked on in Huawei, and you're going to trust them. Those people are usually Chinese. Those people are usually people who have been with the company for a long time, and you're not going to trust locals as much because that's not going to benefit you, right? You don't know how to work with them. You don't know who you can rely on, and you have Huawei's entire value proposition for these projects is speed and cost. So if you're worried about hitting speed and cost targets, are you gonna like take the time to build the relationships with the locals? No, you're gonna bring in people from that you've worked with on other projects or that you know from headquarters. But the flip side of that is that Huawei has trouble at times complying with local laws. They are, especially in developed markets, they are reviewed very poorly as an employer. So I looked in the article at how in what countries on Glassdoor, which is an employer review site, how they are reviewed, whether they're positive, they're negative, like out of 5, how many stars, and what people complain about. So Lenovo was pretty average for a multinational. They were somewhere in the 3s, and especially developed countries. When people complained about them, it was like, well, the company's business isn't doing as well as it used to, or oh, it can be annoying to have to deal with the time differences. But with Huawei, you read, and there was just this resentment, I think, in a lot of these reviews. There were allegations of really like kind of sinister behavior, of law breaking, of like what one person who told me who used to work at Huawei, he said that when they sent him abroad, they had the Chinese team that would basically communicate together and discuss together about what the actual real issues were. And then they would think about what they were going to tell the foreign staff or the local staff there. And usually it was different than what the actual reality was, that they were, basically, they're basically lying. There's really no other way to put it. So there you see with the difference between these two companies is, like Huawei, at the same time, Huawei knows what it is, though. Like Huawei accomplishes, like they go in there and they have this ruthless brutality and this like laser focus on their goal, and they usually end up getting it done. But they cause all these problems in the process, but they get it done. So ultimately, I don't really know what to think about that, because Lenovo has really attempted to take this kind of multinational route of going the route of they're a publicly listed company. They have very kind of standard kind of Western style corporate governance. Their executive team and board are at least half foreign. But lately they haven't done so great. They've made their Motorola and their IBM server acquisitions that they did about 5 years ago have not gone well. And Huawei is doing well. So I think that I don't really know what to think, because like Huawei does in a lot of ways represents like really poor corporate citizenship and really poor behavior, but they also get stuff done. And
sorry, it's kind of funny you say that, because it feels like that's almost a microcosm for a lot of the ways that people see China as well, where there is this kind of, on the one, especially from business people and entrepreneurs, I think that there is on this one hand a bit of ambivalence, because on the one hand, it's very clear that the Chinese government does not share most Western values. But on the other hand, you look at, I think one of the biggest things is the railway system. I mean, this is just something that the Chinese government decided, back in in the early 2000s, hey, we're going to do this. 15 years later, it's completely developed and mature. I mean, at this point, it's people can get from city to city, province to province in a matter of hours, whereas in some cases it used to take up to a day. And even longer in many cases. And so I think it's kind of interesting, because, Huawei feels very, very similar. And, to not to sound, xenophobic or intolerant, but it feels very Chinese in a sense of looking at the results is more important than actually how you do it. And also, just dealing with foreigners in general, that this is the problem, right? If you want to get something done, well, explaining it to a foreigner who shares different values from you, who are more than likely object to almost everything that you're suggesting, just go around them, just figure out a way to go around them, because at the end of the day, they actually don't have that much authority internally. And, and as you were saying, it's my KPI that's going to be affected, and I want to be able to be successful. So we're going to take a quick break here and listen to an interview that Matt did with his co-founder Salmon, talking about corporate culture at Huawei.
All right, so Salmon, you worked in Huawei before. What did you actually do in Huawei?
I do like global sales. I support a global team to make the network solutions, and I will travel from time to time to go to different countries. Yeah, basically like product sales.
Okay, and you were in India. You were
in Europe and Argentina.
Okay.
Yeah, quite a few actually.
All over.
Yeah.
All right. So, how would you personally? What's your personal experience of Huawei's company culture outside China?
Outside China, I think it varied, from country to country. That's my personal experience. For example, if the culture in India and in France, they are actually different because definitely there is some culture of that country. Okay, will also built in. So overall, I think Huawei still struggle for this international culture, how to integrate with a local team. I think that's definitely. I think that's a struggle. Because in Huawei we have this saying, the front line always call for the ammunition. I don't know if that's a right expression.
How do you say that
English.
in Chinese?
前线呼唤炮火.
Okay.
Okay, they always direct, where you should put your efforts on. And so we always have the meeting between the frontline team, including foreigners, and with the support team, which is engineers. So, in most of the time, engineers will struggle with English, So Chinese staff will act as a bridge to make the translation. So, which actually makes it a bit hard. The efficiency is low. But Huawei, I think it is a must do. I think for Huawei to want to implement this policy. Yeah.
So how would you describe the communication between local staff and the staff coming from China or coming from Shenzhen usually? Was there good communication there? Were there any issues or differences in culture? What was your experience?
My experience is, I think, is good. When we come to each country, we will have meetings with the local staff. We always support each other, and the communication usually turns out good. Yeah, that's my overall experience, and we have a different level of communication, right? And usually, I have better experience in India because I stayed there for more than 1.5 years, and at this, I think employee level, we work with the local teams. The experience is good, and the communication is good, and the friendship is there. And also for the middle and high level, always you can find the Chinese management and the local management. They will communicate. Usually it went well.
So Huawei has this reputation for being a company which has a very militaristic style, very hardworking style, and expectations that you have to meet your KPIs. Is this culture, when it comes outside China, are the local team able to adopt this as well?
I think actually, I heard some people explained, because internally, if you in domestic market in headquarters, you can always feel this fighting culture is everywhere. And we even have some internal discussion. It come to a degree that management think this is not a good thing because there's too much internal fighting. So they actually try to minimize that in international markets of it, management. But still, this culture is still there, and I heard local team complain about it. Mm-hmm. I think that's my experience in quite a few years back. Yeah.
Okay. You've told me before, but there's some stories, right, about the sort of company culture of Huawei and how, you know, some of the founders and what they've done, and people who've tried to break away from the company and what's happened and things like that. Could you recount some of the more interesting stories that you've heard from your time at Huawei?
Yeah, definitely. I think Huawei is a bit, you know, in a sense like a military, you know, like an army to some extent. So it demands people's loyalty. So for example, if you leave the country, leave the company, if you want to come back, it's gonna be very difficult. And there's an extreme case, which is about Li Yinan. Li Yinan is probably one of the youngest, you know, director in Huawei's history. And usually, I think back to 1990s, and people saying he's maybe the, you know, the leader after Ren Zhengfei, you know. But unfortunately, he decided to quit Huawei and set up his own company called Gangwan. Right? He also makes some telecommunication devices, and so in some area, actually, it competed with Huawei. And also, he brought a team, you know, a team in Huawei. So Huawei got very angry and set up an office called Da Gangban, you know, which literally means beat Gangwan office.
Okay, the office like specifically designed to compete and destroy this new company.
Yeah, exactly. So, for example, if one of the big competitor of Huawei is actually ZTE, right? So we have a very specific policy against the ZTE when we have a competition, like in a deal with ZTE, we can go down to certain discount when we make our quotation, which is usually higher than like other competitors, Western competitors. But if you met Gangwan, then you can go extreme. Sometimes you can go, you know, you don't care about profit anymore. So the company will take everything to bring down this new Gangwan. So it's restless, you know. So basically, Huawei set up this office, which can maneuver all the resources within the company, because this Gangwan have several product line, and maybe if it come to competition within Huawei, we have several departments compete with them. So it's difficult to coordinate between them. So Huawei set up this office specifically to organize all the resources within the company to make it most efficient to build this new company Gangwan. So eventually he bring down this company and bid down and acquire this whole company, and all the people from Gangwan come back to Huawei, including the director Li Yinan. But Huawei just give him a title, just a title without actual power. And so after I think around 1 year, and Li Yinan left to Baidu. So it's a very brutal, you know, battle.
Yeah. So to summarize that, like they set up, you know, one of the up and coming stars of the company broke away to do their own thing, and then they set up a whole department just designed with superpowers within the organization.
Yeah.
To destroy this new company.
Yes, exactly. I forgot to mention another thing is the human resources. So basically, if you are Gangwan's people, so he will, you know, try to get you to Huawei, right? How to dig you. I don't know how to say that in English term. Waren, yeah. Try to get you, you know, give you very high wage. Actually, much higher than regular wage.
So it's like Leoto, like
Leoto, yeah, hunter, you know.
Headhunt you, right?
Specifically hunt Gangwan's people.
Right. So they're trying to poach all of the talent from this new company.
Talent, trying to get them back. But once actually it ends and they acquire Gangwon, and those people actually is loyal to Gangwon, and when they come to actually as a team, right, acquired by Huawei, and the salary, the wage, dropped significantly.
Okay. Another little point you had in there is so Huawei will provide different quotes for different projects based on who they know their competitors are.
Yes.
Right. So, and if they meet ZTE as a Chinese competitor, they'll quote lower than if it was a local competitor.
Yeah. Sadly, it was. Yes.
Okay.
And that's about all the time we have for this edition of China Tech Talk. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you left a review on iTunes, or if you're on Pocket Cast or Overcast, you can tap on that star button and it will recommend this episode to your network. And coming up in September, Matthew is organizing the ChinaChat conference. It happens every year. I believe this is the third year that it's going on. It is a conference dedicated to digital marketing, in particular WeChat, as you can imagine. It features the leading minds in digital marketing and e-commerce here in China. Featuring some of the people that we've had on the podcast, including Elijah Whaley, CMO of Park Lu, and Thomas Graziani, CEO and founder of Walk the Chat. That's going to be on September 20th and 21st in Shanghai, and the registration link will be in the show notes.